About 15 years ago, I worked in an aerospace company that won an award for being one of the best mid-sized companies in America to work for. It had all the perks, it had the 3 free meals a day, everything you'd expect from that award, and I realized I wasn't satisfied. This wasn't the environment I wanted to work in. And, well, why not? Well, for me, it wasn't just about having free food and a game room and perks. I wanted to be able to use my voice. I wanted my capacity to be harnessed, channeled into some creative endeavor. I wanted to work every day in flow. And I wanted to work in flow with a team working in flow. And something, I didn't know what at the time, but something was in the way. There was the bureaucracy, the politics, the painful meetings, all of the things that get in the way of flow in organizations, even with all those wonderful perks. So I was hungry to find a better way, and I left and I started my own company to be an experiment ground. And I spent the next 15 years as an entrepreneur, building organizations, looking for this better way. There's got to be a better way to organize. And let me share with you a bit about what I found. And I would eventually name the system that we came up with Holacracy. And I think of it as a new social technology, right? So a social technology is about how we work together, how we set expectations with each other, how we hold each other accountable, right? How we break down the work for some overall purpose. So social technology. And if you think about the typical social technology in use in the vast majority of organizations today, it looks something like this. Right? It is kind of like a feudal system. There's kings and barons and lords and ultimately peasants and serfs. Right? And it's not that there's anything wrong exactly with this technology. This matured about 100 years ago, and for the environments in our world 100 years ago, this is a perfectly fine social technology to use. But the world's changed a lot since we invented the telegraph, and this was at play, right? And yet our management technology hasn't really evolved much. It hasn't kept pace. We're using a 100-year-old social technology in most of our companies today. And when you have this, you get a lot of what you'd expect with this kind of power structure, the feudal system. Anyone watch Game of Thrones? Anyone see any familiarity with that inside a typical organization? And sometimes you get a power structure that looks actually more like this. Right, I'll give you a second to take that in. You know, when humans are involved and egos show up and we have these hierarchical power relationships, we end up with some messiness sometimes, right? But there is another way. There's another way to organize power, to organize human relationships and human society, and we experience that every day outside of our workplaces. We experience order without bosses telling us what to do. And I can fly into Austin and trust there will be a taxi ready and waiting I can engage with to take me to a hotel, and I can book a room, I can get a meal, I can do any number of other things without a boss organizing it all top down. It's a different kind of order. It's emergent order. It's the kind of order that shows up when you have the right framework of rules in which free agents can interact and figure out how to best pursue their local purpose within an overall system in healthy interconnections and relationships with others. We have a lot of order in society without a king directing the economy, directing us where to be and what to do. So how do we bring that into our organizations? It became a question for me as I went through this journey. And what we found, what we developed was a rule system, kind of like we have in our society. What is a basic framework of rules that enables emergent order without top-down control, without a management hierarchy? And it starts with a constitution. So this constitution, just like in our society, gives us a basic framework of rules, a rule book. I think of this like Holacracy is kind of like a new sport or a new game that we can play together in organizations. These are the rules of that game, of how we can interact and influence others. How do we hold people accountable and set expectations and all those things we do need to do, and we look to managers typically to do. Well, this gives us another path and another way. And as of today, there are about 300 companies around the world running with Holacracy, and they all use that rule book, that Holacracy Constitution. It's an open source document. It is out on the web, and it evolves, and it evolves by a whole community of people running their company like this, searching for what new fundamental code, what basic rule system best supports an organization working in flow, with individuals working together in flow. This is kind of the master code, the rules of that game. And the first move a company makes when they want to do this, once they get a taste of it, they experience it, and they decide this rule system, this game is working better for them than the management hierarchy. They've tasted it, they want to do it. The CEO, or whoever holds power, it might be in a department in a larger company or what have you, but whoever holds power, typically the CEO, will sign a declaration ceding their power into this rule system, ceding their power to run things however they want, and saying, I am no longer above the law. I'm bound by rule of law, just like everyone else. And that Constitution is going to provide the fundamental laws of the land. And the reason it's the same Constitution for all different companies of all different shapes and sizes is because it doesn't tell you how to run and organize your specific business. Rather, it gives you a meta framework. It tells you how to figure out those things. How do you figure out who's going to expect what from whom? And who's going to make which decisions? Right? And what are the limits on their authority? This gives you the rules of the game to figure all that out and evolve it continually, because we learn in organizations, and this encodes that learning when you can evolve and change your structure every day. So let me give you a glimpse of what this looks like, some of the key shifts embodied in this system. And the first is, anyone here have job descriptions in your organization, right? Probably. When was the last time you ran to your job description excitedly to figure out what you should really focus on today? Anyone? Right? Do you do that every day? Probably not. And it's probably because your job description is a bureaucratic artifact that has very little real bearing on what you actually need to do day to day, and what others can actually count on you for and expect from you. It's probably out of date by the time it rolls off the printer. So instead, Holacracy has a system of dynamic roles. They're updated every month or twice a month by the team doing the work. It captures real clarity. You still have structure. Holacracy is not about throwing out structure. It's about replacing it with a different structure, a more dynamic structure. And when you fill a role that is updated by you and your team regularly, that captures real clarity of what you need to do, when you fill a role, instead of having a manager delegate authority to you, which really means as long as you're doing what the manager wants, you're fine, and then as soon as you're not, they'll micromanage you, right? Instead, you have truly distributed authority, where when you fill a role, you have the authority to do anything that makes sense to you to get the job of that role done, unless there's an explicit rule against it, not as long as your manager implicitly approves of what you're doing. There is no manager to micromanage you. You have truly distributed authority, like in society. I can do whatever I want with my property, right? But when I want to use my neighbor's car, I better ask his permission, and I know the boundary. Those roles give me boundaries and authority within. And instead of large-scale reorganizations every few years, we have rapid iteration. We are updating the very structure of the organization, who does what, and what do we expect from each other, twice a month, continually. We're trying things, we're learning, we're testing, we're adapting. And because we have that learning process, we don't need to align the organization by playing politics. Instead, we have transparent rules. It's more like a sports team on the field. They're not playing politics, calling meetings, coming to consensus with each other on what we should do with the ball next. Right? Rather, everybody knows their place in that system. They have a lot of freedom to act, and we have a rule system that helps us align. We stay within those rules. So here's an example of a role within Holacracy, a role I fill right now, Holacracy spokesperson. My role has a purpose. It's a purpose-driven system. Every role has a purpose, part of the company's purpose. And when I fill this role, I have the authority to take any action that makes sense to me to get the job done, as long as I don't violate some explicit constraint or rule that we've created together. So I can do anything I want. I don't need permission to act first. Autonomy is the basic starting point in my role. But there's another role I work with, web architect. This role has what we call a domain. Think of that like a property right. This role owns our website. That's telling everyone else around him, if you want to mess with the website, it's his property. Ask his permission, work with him. So I can do anything I want as long as I don't mess with my neighbor's property. Does that sound familiar? It sounds a lot like what we're used to in our societies. I have the freedom to lead my life and lead my world as makes sense to me for my purpose. But in this case, it's for my role's purpose. I'm a steward of my roles. And I fill, by the way, 20-some roles in my organization. That's true in most companies using this. You get a lot of different roles, and they're little pieces of work throughout the whole company, not just in one team. And when I fill this role, I have the authority to do whatever I want as long as I don't mess with my neighbor's property. Again, just like real life. These roles, though, they need to be evolved. That clarity is only good if it's dynamic and updated in almost real time as we learn together. So roles are grouped into circles. And every month or twice a month, every circle will do a governance process where anyone filling a role in that team is invited to show up and participate. They're invited to help evolve the roles in that team, set new expectations, create new roles, add accountabilities to roles, add authorities, define the property boundaries between my role and yours. What decisions can you make? What can I make? And what are the limits, the bounds? All that gets defined in this governance process. And this happens in every circle throughout the organization. There are many. So this isn't just something done from the top and handed down. It's every team doing the work is learning together, and they're evolving their structure, their power structure. And then day to day, when we go do work, we know our autonomy. We can do anything to express our role, right? We just need to not mess with our neighbor's property. And when we need to update the property boundaries, we have a governance process to go to do that, and a collaborative process for coming to decisions around that. So the cool thing here, the structure looks very organic. It's cells within organ systems. Autonomy at every level of scale, and yet interconnection, alignment at every level of scale. This is how nature scales. But the best way to learn this is to get a taste of it, experience it. And there are a lot of companies now around the world doing it. There's a lot of resources for free on the website, holacracy.org, check that out. And one way or another, whether it's Holacracy or something else, I invite you to just question, is the management hierarchy the right operating system for your organization in today's world? There are other approaches and other options to getting order without top-down control and bosses. Thank you.